Dog was chained for 7 years and attacked all humans, but when this man approached him, tears. The bitter wind howled through the empty, desolate yard on Old Mill Road. The dilapidated house sat like a forgotten relic, its broken windows casting a cold, empty stare onto the barren world. In the backyard, a heavy chain rattled against the frozen earth. Attached to it was a dog, large, gray, and scarred from years of suffering. His fur, once lush and strong, was now matted, and his eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now dark and wary. Gray, as he was called, had known nothing but this 7 long years of cold, loneliness, and cruelty. No longer the playful puppy he once was, Gray had learned to survive in isolation. His world had shrunk to the length of his chain, each day repeating the last. But something was about to change. On this icy winter morning, as the wind howled through the trees, an unexpected sound reached his ears, the distant crunch of footsteps in the snow. Tommy Wilson, an 8-year-old boy from 2 houses down, had ventured outside to search for his lost kite. His laughter cut through the air as he moved toward the frozen pond near Gray's home, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the ice. Gray's instincts kicked in. His powerful muscles tensed. His sharp eyes locked onto the boy's every move, and he watched as Tommy ventured farther out onto the pond surface. Suddenly, with a sharp crack, the ice gave way. Tommy's scream pierced the air, and Gray's heart raced. Every muscle in his body screamed to act, but the chain held him back, biting into his scarred neck. Pain shot through him as he pulled against the chain, the links digging deeper. His bark, a desperate cry for help, echoed through the wind, but there was no one to hear. With every ounce of strength, Gray lunged toward the ice, desperate to save the boy. The chain bit deeper into his neck, blood seeping from the wounds, but he didn't stop. Each time the chain yanked him back, Gray fought harder. He wasn't about to give up, not when Tommy's life was on the line. The boy's small body was sinking, his struggles weaker with each passing second. Gray threw himself against the chain one final time, and this time it gave way. The ground anchor, weakened by years of frost, snapped. Freedom. In a burst of strength, Gray surged toward the pond's edge, diving into the freezing water without a second thought. His jaws found Tommy's coat, and with everything he had left, he pulled the boy to safety. When Tommy's parents found him, unconscious but alive, they assumed he had crawled there on his own. No one saw the bloodied paw prints in the snow, slowly being covered by fresh powder. No one saw the dog, shivering violently in the dark, his chain once again locked in place. And no one knew that Gray had saved a life that night, not for the praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do. This was not the story of a dangerous dog. This was the story of a dog who had been chained, forgotten, and abused, but still beneath the scars, there was a heart full of courage and an unwavering instinct to protect. The boy, forever changed by this encounter, would remember only a blur of gray fur and the strength of a dog that had never known love, yet still knew how to give it. Welcome to HeartForce, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. Gray's past, though marked by pain and neglect, was also a testament to his resilience. He had been born in a shelter in Springfield, Massachusetts, along with 6 other puppies, the offspring of a rescued German Shepherd mix. From the beginning, Gray stood out. His silvery coat and amber eyes caught the attention of the shelter staff, and they quickly noticed his extraordinary sensitivity. When the other puppies cried, Gray would nuzzle them, offering comfort and support. His temperament was gentle, and his instincts were nurturing. When the Peterson family arrived that summer, they seemed like the perfect fit. James and Sarah Peterson, a well-to-do couple with children and a large home, came to the shelter looking for a family dog. They promised the staff that Gray would have a large yard to run in, a warm bed, and the love of their children. The shelter workers were moved by their story, and they signed the adoption papers, filled with hope for Gray's future. The first few weeks in his new home were everything a puppy could dream of. There was food, shelter, and affection. Gray played with the children, slept soundly at night, and learned basic commands. His gentle nature earned him compliments from the neighbors, who marveled at how well-behaved he was. But soon, everything began to change. When James lost his job at the bank, what was once a place of care and affection became one of hostility and neglect. It started with the chain. At just 6 months old, Gray was tethered to the backyard. To keep him from running too much, James said, what was meant to be a temporary measure quickly became permanent. Gray's world shrank as the chain grew heavier, and his ability to move freely was taken away. His once playful, curious nature began to fade as he learned to expect punishment rather than affection. Sarah, once Gray's strongest advocate, began to pull away. She stopped visiting him in the yard, stopped sneaking him treats when James wasn't looking. The children, warned by their father that Gray was becoming dangerous, began to stay away. The dog that had once been the heart of the family was now the object of their neglect. As the years passed, Gray's existence became a quiet tragedy. His body grew large and powerful, but his spirit began to wither. The chain that held him was no longer just a physical restraint. It became the symbol of his life, a life of confinement, pain, and abuse. Yet, even in his darkest hours, something deep inside Gray refused to die. Beneath the physical scars and emotional trauma, a spark of his old self remained. On quiet nights, when the house was dark and still, he would look up at the stars with the same curious eyes he had as a puppy. It was as if he was remembering a different life, or perhaps hoping for one yet to come. The years wore on, and the Peterson situation grew worse. James's drinking spiraled out of control, and Sarah withdrew from the community. The family's reputation in the neighborhood faded as their problems mounted. Yet, through it all, Gray remained chained, his life defined by the chain, his heart burdened with the weight of neglect. The neighbors had begun to notice the change in the Petersons, but no one spoke up. When some of the children tried to offer Gray food, they were warned away by James, who accused them of encouraging dangerous behavior. Gray's once gentle nature was now painted as aggression. The Petersons created a false narrative, a story of a dog who was becoming more dangerous with each passing day, even though Gray's true nature remained unchanged beneath the layers of abuse. Gray had learned to be wary of sudden movements, to anticipate pain instead of affection. His meals became irregular, depending on whether someone remembered or cared to fill his bowl. He survived by becoming invisible, curling up in the corners of his tiny world, waiting for the next day to begin, just like the last. It seemed there would be no end to his suffering. But fate had other plans. One cold winter day, the Petersons were evicted from their home, leaving Gray behind, forgotten once again. But this time, it would be different. The animal control officer, Linda Parker, had been monitoring Gray's case for years. She knew about the neglect, and this time, there would be no turning a blind eye. The opportunity to save Gray had finally arrived. When Alex Martinez received the call from Linda Parker, he knew this would be one of the most difficult rescues of his career. He had been saving animals for over 2 decades, but this situation was different. Gray wasn't just another dog left behind by a careless owner. He was a dog whose spirit had been crushed, whose life had been reduced to nothing but survival. And now, Alex had to save him. It wasn't the first time they'd tried to help Gray. For years, animal control had attempted to intervene, but the Petersons had always found ways to deflect, to avoid the truth. Every time a case was made, the Petersons would manipulate the story, make excuses, and buy time. The chain remained, and so did Gray's suffering. But now, after the eviction, there was a window of opportunity. The property was about to be seized by the bank, and the clock was ticking. If they didn't act quickly, Gray would be left alone once again, in his world of frozen earth and chain-bound misery. As Alex drove to the property, his mind raced with the challenges ahead. Gray wasn't just physically broken, his heart and mind were fractured as well. After 7 years of neglect, how could a dog like this ever trust again? The chances of getting close to him were slim. especially given his aggressive behavior whenever anyone tried to approach. But Alex had faced worse odds before. He wasn't about to back down now. When he arrived at the property, Linda led him to the backyard. The scene that greeted them was grim. The yard, though familiar to Alex, seemed colder than he remembered. The house, abandoned and rotting, cast long shadows over the land, and Gray lay in the far corner of the yard, his large form a stark contrast to the barren ground around him. Gray's eyes locked on Alex's instantly, full of fear and distrust. His stance was defensive, his muscles tense, his teeth bared in warning. The chain rattled as Gray shifted, and Alex could see the deep scars around his neck, where the metal had cut into his flesh over the years. The smell of decay and neglect was overwhelming, but Alex's focus never wavered. He was here for Gray. Nothing else mattered. "We tried everything," Linda whispered, her voice filled with defeat. "He's not approachable. He's terrified of people. We can't even get within 10 feet of him." Alex nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. The typical methods for rescuing a traumatized animal wouldn't work here. Treats, barriers, and tranquilizers had all failed in previous attempts. They needed a new approach, a gentler approach, a slow approach. Alex turned to Linda. "We're going to take this one step at a time. No sudden movements. No pressure." He set down his bag, and instead of reaching for equipment or supplies, he pulled out a worn paperback book. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to reach a scared animal wasn't through force or distraction. It was through calm, constant presence. Alex sat on the cold ground, about 20 feet from Gray. He began to read aloud, the soft rhythm of his voice cutting through the silence of the yard. The book was simple, Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, its language steady and calming. He didn't rush. He just sat, reading to the wind, to the empty yard, and most of all, to Gray. For hours, Alex remained in place, reading quietly, never trying to force an interaction. He wasn't there to demand anything from Gray. He was there simply to be a constant presence in the dog's chaotic world, a reminder that not all humans were threats. As the hours wore on, Gray's behavior began to change. His growling, which had been relentless at the start, grew quieter, more sporadic. His muscles, which had been rigid, began to relax ever so slightly. For the first time in years, Gray's body language wasn't entirely defensive. He was still wary, but something was shifting. The tension in his posture began to ease. Alex remained calm, reading his book, talking softly when Gray's eyes lingered on him, letting the dog come to him at his own pace. When Alex moved, he did so slowly, deliberately, showing no threat. The presence of another human had always meant pain and fear to Gray, but now, for the first time, it seemed to mean something else. Peace. As the day wore on, Alex introduced a new element. He took out his lunch, a simple sandwich, and began eating it slowly, letting pieces fall to the ground beside him. "You're welcome to share," Alex murmured, but no rush. The quiet offering was a small act of kindness, a moment of normalcy in a world that had long been anything but. Gray watched, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. Slowly, cautiously, he crept forward, his nose twitching. For the first time in 7 years, Gray was choosing to engage, not out of desperation, but because he wanted to. He wanted to believe that this human wasn't like the others who had hurt him. The transformation, though slow, was undeniable. Gray began to take tentative steps toward Alex, moving closer but stopping short when he felt uncertain. The emotional barriers were breaking bit by bit. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Alex reached his hand out, palm open. Gray hesitated for a moment, his body tense with indecision. But then, as if making a choice, Gray lowered his head and touched his nose to Alex's fingers. The contact was brief, but it was enough. It was the first voluntary connection Gray had made in 7 years. The first step in his healing. Alex stayed still, letting Gray retreat when he needed to. "It's okay, buddy," Alex whispered. "You're doing great. We've got time." The transformation in Gray was gradual, but undeniable. Each day, as Alex spent time with him. He could see small victories emerging from the depths of the dog's trauma. The process was slow, slower than Alex had hoped, but it was progress. In the sanctuary of Second Chance Rehabilitation Center, Gray was safe. The world he had once known, defined by cold, chains, and fear, was being replaced by something different, something that could heal him. For the first time in years, Gray had a space where he wasn't afraid to move, to explore. The center's calming atmosphere, with its soft lighting and gentle sounds, allowed him to relax in ways he had never been able to before. But it wasn't just the physical environment that helped, it was the people around him. At the center, Gray encountered people who understood trauma, people who didn't push him too hard, but who patiently waited for him to open up. He began to trust them in his own time, at his own pace. But it was Alex's presence that meant the most to Gray. Through every moment of fear, Alex remained steadfast. There was no rush, no pressure, just calm assurance that Gray could heal when he was ready. It was during the third week of Gray's stay at the center that his recovery began to accelerate. Emily, the center's behavioral specialist, had been working with Gray on exercises to rebuild his trust in humans. She had seen dogs like Gray before, animals so broken by their past that it seemed impossible to help them. But she had also seen those same dogs transform, their pain replaced by the ability to trust again. And she was confident that Gray could do the same. Every morning, Gray would receive his meals from Emily. At first, he was hesitant to take the food directly from her hand. His instinct told him to be cautious, to wait until he was sure she wouldn't hurt him. But with time, his hesitation turned into curiosity. Emily would sit with him, speaking softly, her tone soothing and calm, allowing him to eat in peace. One morning, after a week of this routine, Gray surprised Emily. He walked over to her, gently nudging her hand with his nose as if to say, "I'm ready." It was a small gesture, but one that carried more weight than anyone could have imagined. Gray was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to live again. Emily smiled as she stroked his fur. "You're getting there, buddy," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. For the first time, Gray seemed to understand that he was not a burden. He was not something to be feared. He was simply a dog, worthy of love and care. But Gray's healing wasn't just about learning to trust humans. It was also about learning to trust himself again. His body, too, had been broken by years of neglect. His muscles were weak from the constant strain of being tethered. His joints ached from the cold. And his coat, once glossy and beautiful, was now matted and dull. But Alex and the team at the center had a plan for Gray's rehabilitation. It wasn't just about building his strength. It was about rebuilding his confidence. One of the key parts of his recovery was physical therapy. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the center's veterinarian, had developed a specialized program to help Gray regain his muscle mass and joint strength. Emily, working alongside the medical team, guided Gray through gentle exercises that gradually increased in intensity. The pool therapy sessions were particularly transformative. The warm water allowed Gray to move without the weight of his chain, and the flotation vest helped him rediscover the joy of running, jumping, and playing. The first time Gray swam, his tail wagged for the first time in years. It was a simple act, just a dog learning how to move freely in water, but it was a monumental moment. Gray was beginning to remember what it was like to be a dog again. But despite the progress in his physical recovery, it was Gray's emotional healing that would take the longest. His past had been filled with pain, isolation, and abuse. He had learned to live with a wall around his heart, keeping everyone at a distance. But slowly, that wall began to crack. One afternoon, as the staff watched from the observation window, Gray did something that shocked everyone. He walked over to Luna, a young puppy who had recently arrived at the center. Luna was timid, frightened by the world around her, and her anxiety mirrored Gray's own in many ways. But instead of growling or retreating, Gray gently nudged Luna with his nose, as if to reassure her. The staff members exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was the first time they had seen Gray interact with another dog in such a gentle way. It was as though the nurturing instinct that had been buried deep inside him all these years was finally emerging. As the weeks passed, Gray's interactions with the other dogs at the center grew. He no longer shied away from them. Instead, he would sit by their enclosures, watching over them like a guardian. He seemed to recognize the pain in the other dogs, the trauma they had endured, and he did what he could to help them heal. He had learned, through his own suffering, how to be kind, how to be patient, and now he was passing that knowledge on to others. One day, Alex stood in the yard, watching Gray as he lay next to a new arrival, a terrified young German shepherd named Storm. Gray's eyes, once filled with fear and pain, were now filled with understanding. He had become a mentor, a guide for the other dogs, showing them that healing was possible. His transformation was nothing short of miraculous. "Look at him," Alex said to Linda, his voice thick with emotion. "He's not just healing. He's helping others heal, too." The days at Second Chance Rehabilitation Center were no longer defined by the struggles that had marked Gray's past. The once terrified dog, whose world had been limited to the cold ground beneath his paws and the heavy chain that bound him, was now a symbol of transformation. But even as Gray's physical recovery reached new heights, the most profound change lay in the bond he had formed with Alex and the others at the center. Every day, Gray grew more confident, his movements more fluid, his tail wagging more often. The physical scars on his body began to heal, but it was the emotional scars that still required attention. Although he had come to trust Alex, the other staff members, and even some of the dogs at the center, there was still one challenge left: Gray's fear of abandonment. It wasn't a fear that could be undone quickly. It was a deep-rooted, painful fear that had been ingrained in him over 7 years of neglect. But Alex had never given up on him. He continued to provide Gray with the patience and consistency that the dog so desperately needed. Alex spent hours with him every day, reinforcing the lessons of trust and security. Then came the day that would define the final chapter in Gray's journey. It was a typical morning at the center, cool and quiet, with a light fog hanging over the property. Gray, now fully recovered, was playing in the yard with Luna, the young puppy who had become his constant companion. The other dogs at the center, too, seemed more at ease, their behaviors more relaxed with each passing day. But Gray's transformation was still far from complete. While he had become gentle and kind, showing love and understanding to the new arrivals at the center, he still had not fully let go of the trauma from his past. He remained cautious, always keeping a careful distance from new humans, unsure of whether they, too, would betray him. That morning, as Alex entered the yard, he called out to Gray. The dog's ears perked up, and for a moment, Gray hesitated. His body was still tense, but his eyes met Alex's with an expression that was different from anything Alex had seen before. There was no fear, only curiosity. Alex knelt down, holding out his hand as he had done so many times before. "Come on, Gray," Alex said softly, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "You're safe here. You can trust me." It was in that moment, as Gray stood at the edge of the yard, that everything changed. The dog, who had once been afraid of every human he met, took a step forward, and then another. His body language, once tight with fear, began to relax. Slowly, carefully, Gray approached Alex, his steps unsure but determined. When he finally reached Alex, he did something that no one had expected. Gray leaned forward and pressed his head against Alex's chest, the contact soft but full of meaning. It was the first time he had shown such complete vulnerability, and the first time in 7 years that he had allowed himself to trust another human fully. It was as if, in that one simple action, Gray was saying, "I'm ready. I'm ready to heal, to move forward, and to love again." Alex wrapped his arms around Gray, pulling him close. The tears flowed freely as he held the dog, who had taught him so much about patience, trust, and healing. For the first time, Alex understood what it truly meant to save a life. Not just to remove a dog from a bad situation, but to give him the opportunity to heal, to trust, and to love. Gray was free now, not just from the chain that had held him captive for 7 long years, but free from the emotional chains of his past. He had been broken, but now he was whole. He had discovered his strength, his courage, and most importantly, his ability to love again. As Alex knelt on the ground, holding Gray in his arms, he whispered softly, "You did it, buddy. You made it." From that moment on, Gray's life would never be the same. No longer a prisoner of his past, he had found his place in the world. He had found his home, and he had found a family that would love and protect him for the rest of his life. The journey that had started with a chain and a lifetime of suffering had led to this moment of peace. It wasn't just Gray's story of healing. It was the story of redemption, resilience, and the power of love. And as the days passed, Gray would continue to be a reminder to everyone at Second Chance Rehabilitation Center that no matter how broken a soul may seem, there is always hope for healing. Gray's story is one of incredible transformation. From the harshness of neglect to the warmth of compassion, it reminds us that even the most broken can heal. Just like Gray, we too carry emotional scars from our past, but with patience, support, and love, we can find our way back to trust and happiness. Whether you're dealing with trauma, fear, or loss, remember that healing is possible. It takes time, but it's worth every step. What do you think of Gray's incredible journey? Let us know in the comments below and share your own stories of healing and second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to HeartForce for more inspiring stories about the powerful bond between humans and dogs.